The glass conference room shimmered in the midday light, glare reflecting off the technical panel. A single dad in a faded polo sat at the table's end. His young daughter waited patiently outside. The CEO strode in, her sharp gaze freezing the room. She placed the file down with a smirk. "So this is the engineer?" Managers chuckled. The father felt mocked. A critical system failure flashed. Infrastructure was seconds from collapse. The CEO looked at him, urgent. No one answered her question. The father stood ready to leave. The CEO cut through the tension. "Wait." The room froze as the beaten dad uttered one single, definitive sentence. Elias Vance was a ghost in the high-tech machine, haunted by his former brilliance. Once he had been elite, a principal operations engineer, known for his uncanny ability to debug complex, interconnected systems with almost telepathic speed. His former colleagues called him the system whisperer, a legend whispered in the data center halls. His work wasn't about coding features, it was about ensuring the beating heart of the infrastructure never skipped a beat. He was the one they called when everything else failed. But that life ended abruptly 7 years ago. His wife Maria, a kind social worker whose fierce dedication often masked her own fragile health, passed away suddenly after a brief illness. Grief and duty collided violently. Elias didn't just step down, he vanished from the corporate world to become a full-time hands-on father to Lily, who was then only 4. He had traded the cold, humming server racks for warm, brightly colored school runs, and global deployment strategy for the simple, vital choreography of bedtime stories and scraped knees. For years, he worked freelance, taking on volatile, low-margin contracts, the break-fix jobs nobody else wanted, often working from 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. His resume now had a glaring 6-year responsibility gap, a void that corporate recruiters viewed with suspicion, labeling him as either uncommitted, lacking ambition, or perhaps worse, fundamentally obsolete. They saw a liability, not an asset. This interview at Novatech, a trillion-dollar behemoth in infrastructure technology, was his final, desperate attempt to secure stable employment. He needed a place where the twin anxieties of health insurance and predictable income weren't constant, gnawing fears. The pressure was immense. Lily sat outside the conference room, perched on a plush velvet bench, clinging to a worn-out copy of a fantasy novel. She was a silent, solemn presence. There was literally no one else to watch her. The high-end corporate daycare was exclusively for full-time established employees, a benefit Elias did not qualify for yet. Lily understood the gravity of the day. Her small presence, though quiet, was a visible, undeniable statement of her father's uncompromising priority. He was applying for stability for her, and she was there to support his fight. The CEO, Isabella Thorne, was a force of nature. She was the architect of Novatech's explosive valuation, known for her ruthless pursuit of efficiency and an almost inhuman pressure on quarterly KPIs. She trusted data, metrics, and aggressive projections above all else. She prioritized image, polished credentials, and the perceived safety of a candidate who had never once deviated from the upward career path, over the messy reality of deep, hands-on, problem-solving technical depth. Elias had been called to this high-stakes meeting only because his name, that of a former industry legend whose technical white papers still circulated, had been flagged during an automated search of old industry records. The current lead engineer, Mark, had panicked when the critical system issue first surfaced and requested a list of historical troubleshooters. Elias was an unfortunate, inconvenient coincidence, a name match on a recycled legacy list. Isabella and her board were actually there to finalize the hiring of the younger, impeccably credentialed Mark, who possessed all the right MIT degrees and, crucially, a flawless, continuous employment record. Elias was simply an extra formality they had to quickly dismiss. When Isabella delivered the line, "So this is the engineer?" her tone wasn't just impatient. It was laced with a patronizing disbelief that this unpolished, slightly tired-looking man could possibly be the legendary system whisperer. Elias heard only undisguised mockery. He felt the dismissive glances from the slick, suited executives who had replaced the grizzled, passionate engineers he once knew. He knew what they saw, a man who put family first and was therefore, to them, fundamentally weak, unreliable, and past his prime. He tightened his tie, a pointless, nervous gesture of useless defense. The shame of being judged by his life choices felt suffocating. Just as he was about to mentally check out, a small folded piece of paper caught his eye. It was taped to the glass outside. Lily's handwriting, uneven but firm. "Daddy, don't give up. We need this." The small note, simple and loving, was a lightning bolt of pride and resolve. He inhaled slowly, deciding he would answer every question with pure, unvarnished technical truth, regardless of the imminent dismissal. Unbeknownst to Elias, the board had already voted. Mark was hired, pending the signing of the massive contract. Elias was a statistical footnote, ready to be swept aside. But fate, the irony of corporate arrogance, and the hidden complexity of millions of lines of code, had other, far more dramatic plans. The meeting was supposed to conclude with a triumphant handshake and Isabella's signature on a $50 million infrastructure deal with their largest European client. The mood was one of suppressed celebration. Then, the calm shattered. The lights didn't just flicker. The intense red LED indicator on the wall-mounted global status board erupted into a rapid, aggressive strobe. It pulsed 3 times, the universally recognized emergency level, before settling into an angry, demanding crimson. The polished conference room instantly transformed from a political stage into a high-stakes operational command center. David, the lead systems administrator, whose face was usually pale, was now ash-white as he stammered into his headset. "CEO, we have a major anomaly. Core module Delta 7. It's not a single fault. Initial reports indicate a chain failure, a catastrophic loop. We're losing network stability across all Western region data centers. Escalation is imminent. Estimated customer impact in 15 minutes. The technical team, including Mark, the new hire, erupted into a chaotic defensive argument. Mark, relying on textbook procedures, shouted, "It's a hot patch situation. We need to push the emergency override code path immediately." Another team lead recommended a full system rollback to the last stable state from 24 hours ago. Their solutions were desperate, fragmented, and based on symptom management, not root cause analysis. They were treating the fever, ignoring the infection. Isabella, eyes now blazing with a terrifying professional fury, slammed her hand on the polished mahogany table. The sound cracked the silence. "Silence! I want the root cause, not a Band-Aid. Mark, if you push the override without knowing the source, you risk corrupting the entire database. What triggered the chain reaction? Tell me exactly what we are mitigating against. Now!" Mark, flustered and exposed, could only gesture toward his monitors. "We believe it's a concurrent process deadlock during the nightly sanitation routine, ma'am. The system is consuming memory exponentially." He used all the right words, but his tone lacked conviction. No one could offer a definitive, actionable answer. They were caught in the corporate loop of fixing symptoms rather than diagnosing the structural illness. The time to critical failure clock on the display panel started counting down, its merciless red digits measuring not time, but pure, irreversible financial and reputational loss. The countdown felt agonizing. It was the metric of impending corporate doom. Outside in the hall, Lily had abandoned her book. She watched, wide-eyed, her small face pressed against the glass. She saw the manic panic of executives sprinting past, the rapid, agitated gestures, and the way the clean, corporate veneer was peeling away to reveal a pure, visceral fear. She gripped her lucky charm, a small wooden elephant, tighter, sending silent encouragement to her father inside. Elias, sitting silently at the end of the table, was a quiet island in the storm. He was unconsciously filtering the noise and tuning into the fragmented technical jargon flying across the room. David, the admin, frantically described the error signature over the internal audio system. "It's a cascading memory fault after the nightly sync routine, specifically an integer overflow when the system attempts to write the recovery metadata. Every time we attempt a system check, The primary rollback sequence is triggering the data race again in the recovery partition. The system is in a constant state of resource starvation. The moment David described the specific error pattern, an integer overflow during recovery metadata write, tied to a failed rollback triggered by a nightly sync, Elias froze. His mind, rusty from years of simple freelance fixes, suddenly clicked into high gear. It was a signature he knew intimately, a precise, hidden flaw in the original architecture of the network's foundational data handling module, a module he had conceptualized. He hesitated again. The feeling was a sharp mix of professional satisfaction at the diagnosis and profound personal resentment toward the people who would soon discard him. Why should he expend his mental energy for the firm that had already judged him? His pride demanded silence, but the silence stretched, thick with impending failure. The clock ticked closer to the 5-minute mark. Isabella, visibly shaking with suppressed fury and anxiety, her eyes scanning the terrified faces of her elite, expensive team, finally swung her gaze, almost as an act of desperation, to the man at the end of the table, the outsider, the mechanic with the single dad resume. "Mr. Vance," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, betraying the immense pressure she was under. "You've heard the description. You have decades of operations experience. What is your unfiltered assessment? If you were running this show, what is the first command you would execute?" Elias was certain she was continuing her subtle, cold mockery, a cruel exercise in making the unqualified man feel small before she let him go. The question felt like a final, humiliating test of his ignorance. He opened his mouth to deliver a polite, dismissive farewell, focused on preserving his dignity. The pressure in the conference room was unbearable. Then outside the door, Lily gave him a small, fierce nod, a tiny general commanding her soldier. It was a silent, powerful encouragement. "Don't give up, Daddy." She was asking him to fight for the stability they needed, for his own truth. Elias ignored the panic and the executives. He looked at the screen and saw the intricate, deadly pattern. The engineer in him roared back to life, silencing the single dad's self-doubt and personal grudges. He decided the system was more important than their slights. Elias didn't address Isabella. He didn't even look at David, the admin. His gaze was surgically fixed on the screen, on the stream of cryptic system log data flashing across the technical display. The emotional baggage dissolved, replaced by the cool, pure, absolute logic of the problem. "The root cause is not a deadlock, Mark," Elias stated, his voice calm, focused, and utterly devoid of fear. His tone was not argumentative, it was instructional. It was the language of absolute, unassailable authority, the kind that only true fundamental expertise can generate. And a full node restart is catastrophic. The nightly sync is fine, but the recovery partition is corrupting the metadata. You're hitting a classic race condition and integer overflow in the Delta 7 configuration indexer. The primary write is competing with the emergency recovery subroutine, causing a recursive resource allocation error that forces the system to chase its own tail into a memory leak. Mark, the new young hire, stared, his textbook knowledge failing him. "The race condition? That's impossible, sir. We verified that code path in 2017. It was patched under Project Phoenix." Elias stepped toward the main console, his movements economical and precise. He moved like a conductor stepping onto a podium. "You verified the original code path, but 5 years ago, the entire primary data serialization module was refactored under Project Nightingale. The recovery rollback feature, specifically the indexer utility, was never updated to reflect the new object mapping size. It's an orphan configuration block. It attempts to load an index larger than the allocated memory, leading to the overflow, and it thinks it's rolling back to a legacy schema that no longer exists, which triggers the race condition. It is crashing, trying to find an object that has been de-scoped." He looked directly at Isabella, whose sharp, analytical eyes were now wide, not with fury, but with intense professional astonishment and respect. "How do you know that, Mr. Vance?" she whispered, the question barely audible over the hum of the cooling systems. "That level of specific, granular knowledge. That code hasn't been touched by current staff in 4 years. Elias paused, taking another slow, deliberate breath. He allowed the tension to mount, letting the full weight of his revelation settle over the panicked room. Because I designed the original Delta 7 module 5 years ago, before the Nightingale serialization update. I wrote the indexer utility. I wrote the exact lines that are failing you right now. A stunned, complete silence fell over the room, heavier than the impending failure had been. The man they were ready to dismiss as a failed applicant, the ghost on the old list, wasn't just an engineer. He was the foundational architect. He was the only person in the room with the institutional memory to understand the flaw. "Give me 5 minutes," Elias commanded, cutting off the astonished whispers of the executives. "I need immediate access to the live Delta 7 configuration log and the physical data flow diagram of the indexer utility. I need 5 minutes to isolate the fault trace and calculate the correct memory offset." Isabella's decisiveness returned instantly, honed by years of crisis management. She pointed a finger at David, bypassing Mark entirely. "David, grant Mr. Vance Level 9 access. Bypass all protocols. Do exactly what he says. Now." Her decisive action cut through the lingering doubt. Elias began working. He didn't use a mouse. He hammered commands directly into the terminal, navigating the complex file structure with the fierce, fluid efficiency of muscle memory. He called out the exact config path, the precise line number, and the required data type adjustment. "Go to repository delta7config-indexer.conf and line 7124. Change the primary serialization pointer from legacy map A to current map B. Increase the metadata buffer allocation by 1024 bytes. Then immediately execute a soft patch of the indexer utility, bypassing the nightly sync routine." David, his hands shaking, executed the complex high-risk fix. A nervous second later, the frantic red LED on the status board stuttered violently, flashed an anxious yellow for a moment, and then settled into a steady, confident green. The countdown stopped at 4 minutes, 38 seconds. The entire infrastructure snapped back to absolute stability. The core system was saved. The room was silent again, but this time it was the silence of awe, profound relief, and collective shame. They had been pulled back from the brink of irreversible collapse by the man they had spent the last hour mentally dismissing. Elias leaned back from the console. His work was done. The system was running clean. He hadn't just saved the company, he had validated his entire career. He turned and faced Isabella, his eyes direct, calm, and holding the weight of his years of sacrifice. "The contract is safe. The immediate fix hold," he stated professionally. "But you have a systemic flaw in your change management process, ma'am. You have brilliant young talent who know how to read the code, but no one who understands the history of the architecture. And this specific problem needs a permanent patch, not just a configuration tweak. I can write the path to sustainable correction, but that requires more than 5 minutes." He took 2 deliberate steps closer to the mahogany table, his posture demanding absolute, undivided respect. "And now, a personal note, CEO Thorne." Isabella waited, rigid. The power dynamic in the room had completely flipped. She was the one exposed, the one being assessed. He pointed to the chair he had been sitting in, the last chair at the end of the table. "When I walked in, you looked at me, a man with an outdated shirt, a gap in his resume, and a daughter waiting outside, and you asked, 'So this is the engineer?' in a tone that implied ridicule. I immediately thought you mocked me, confirming every prejudice I've faced since I left my 6-figure career to raise my daughter." His voice was calm, but the undercurrent of emotional exhaustion was unmistakable, vibrating with the injustice of years. The true power of an engineer isn't in his credentials, his impeccable attendance record, or his expensive suit. It's in his ability to see the truth hidden beneath the symptoms. "I came here looking for stability, and I found a company that values appearance over the fundamental depth of knowledge." He then delivered the final crushing blow, the sentence that truly froze the CEO, far colder than the midday light. "I thought you mocked me. I realize now that your system failed the test, but I passed. The only question left is, Did your company pass the test of recognizing value when it walked in the door? Isabella's legendary composure finally broke. Her jaw slackened slightly. She didn't look angry. She looked defeated by her own institutional arrogance. She stood slowly, smoothing her impeccable skirt, making a public admission of fault. You are correct, Mr. Vance. You passed the technical test. My company and I failed the human one. The way we evaluated you was short-sighted and prejudiced, and I apologize for that failure. She acknowledged that the initial coldness was indeed a test of mettle and truth, one she had administered blindly, ironically leading her to almost destroy her own company. The tension was replaced by a strange, heavy relief. The client contract, whose fate hung in the balance, was signed immediately. The near catastrophe, the sheer speed of Elias's diagnosis, and the subsequent emotional confrontation served as a chilling, unforgettable lesson for the entire executive team. In the ensuing 15 minutes, as Elias wrote a concise 5-point memo detailing the permanent fix, the executive team began a frantic, quiet reassessment. They realized they had been optimizing for easily measurable metrics: attendance, degrees, continuous employment, and corporate aesthetics, not for actual operational resilience and intellectual depth. Their priorities had been dangerously misaligned. Isabella Thorne did something unprecedented. She issued a formal public apology to Elias in front of the assembled executives, Mark, and the technical staff who were listening on the conference bridge. Mr. Vance, she stated clearly, her voice broadcast to all corners of the company. Your technical intervention was flawless and saved this company from a multi-million-dollar setback. More importantly, your integrity and your skill highlighted a fundamental weakness in our leadership: our failure to see past a resume gap to the competence beneath. For that, and for the way we treated you, I apologize, unreservedly. The atmosphere, which had been tense, hierarchical, and deeply competitive, began a rapid thaw. Elias, now holding a position of unquestionable leverage, simply nodded, acknowledging the sincerity of the apology without dwelling on the slight. He walked to the door and opened it. Lily, startled by the sudden hush and the sight of her father looking victorious, looked up. Elias smiled and beckoned her into the conference room, now filled with the most powerful people in the industry. It was a visible symbol of his uncompromising priorities. The family that was the very reason for his gap was now the reason for his triumph. Isabella, the CEO, known for her intimidating, ironclad demeanor, immediately moved around the table, putting aside her professional distance. She dropped to one knee, bringing herself exactly to Lily's level. "Hello, Lily," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. The CEO persona momentarily dissolved. "Your father is the smartest engineer I have ever met. He saved my company today. And thank you for the note. It worked." Lily, initially shy, broke into a wide, relieved smile, clutching her wooden elephant. This small human interaction, witnessed by the entire executive staff, signaled the true beginning of a profound cultural shift at Novatech. Later, discussing his future role, Isabella offered him a contract with a salary and equity package that dwarfed the offer given to Mark. Elias accepted the offer, but only after laying down his own terms, which were rooted in his personal journey. He proposed a mandatory, company-wide mentorship and institutional memory transfer program to replace the current toxic culture of aggressive, isolated performance metrics. "We don't need more hotshots chasing external glory, CEO Thorne," he argued. "We need depth. We need every young engineer to understand the architecture's history, not just the current release version. My experience today proved your institutional memory is dangerously fragmented. Let's focus on internal, peer-to-peer mentoring. It's not about showcasing accomplishments. It's about sharing understanding. I want to build a culture where the next generation doesn't fear the inevitable mistake, but sees it as the purest form of learning, backed by the wisdom of the past." Mark and the young engineers, who had watched the panic in Elias's surgical fix, listened intently. Elias's proposal was immediately approved and funded with a generous budget. The air in the conference room, once suffocating with anxiety and ambition, softened into one of mutual respect and collaborative purpose. The value of true technical mentorship had been affirmed by the immense cost of near failure. Elias accepted the title of Chief Resilience Architect, a powerful, newly created role designed specifically to integrate operational history with future development. He took the job under two essential, non-negotiable conditions: flexible hours for all parents across the technical divisions, and the right to work remotely when needed, without question or penalty. His daughter's schedule, not the rigid corporate clock, would remain his primary focus. Isabella, now completely invested in the necessary cultural shift, not only accepted the terms, but immediately commissioned HR to expand the policy company-wide, labeling it the Vance Thorne Family Commitment Policy. It became a permanent, structural legacy of that terrifying midday. The policy was celebrated in internal communications as a move toward valuing employee well-being and acknowledging the complex realities of modern life. Lily no longer waited outside in the hallway. On Elias's first official day as Chief Resilience Architect, she spent the afternoon in the newly created, small, fully staffed parent lounge, a sunlit room created as part of the new policy, reading her book, Securely Supervised. Elias's first few months were quietly effective and deeply focused. He was meticulously writing the permanent, sustainable solution to the race condition, ensuring Novatech would never face that particular crisis again. He found profound satisfaction in the structured, critical work, a return to a vital sense of purpose that had been missing since he left the field. He wasn't just fixing bugs, he was engineering resilience, saving careers and preventing crises, saving lives in a different, digital way. A few weeks after his arrival, a new custom-made plaque appeared above the main entrance to the engineering floor. It was a simple, stark mandate, chosen by Isabella and approved by Elias. Depth over display, honey, it was a daily unspoken reminder to every employee, from the newest intern to the most seasoned executive, that true lasting value resided beneath the polished surface. Elias Vance, the single dad who had been judged by his outdated shirt and his empty resume slot, was finally seen for his true foundational value. His decision to prioritize his family had not been a weakness that disqualified him. It had been the forging of a character, disciplined, uncompromising, and deeply loyal, that ultimately saved the company. And Isabella Thorne, the cold, ruthless CEO, learned the most valuable lesson of her high-powered career: how to quiet the noise of metrics and read the subtle truth, how to listen to the quiet confidence before judging the loud facade of an impressive resume. Her company was not only more profitable and operationally robust, but fundamentally more humane. The single father and his daughter had secured their rightful place, not just in the company, but in its evolving core values. The system operated more sustainably. The small family, once struggling on the outside, had found a respected home and a powerful, defining voice at the top. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Single Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.